Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy and Kurt Leavins. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, fellas.
Hey, David. Hey, Kurt. How are you guys doing tonight?
A lot better than a lot better than I was at noon today. I mean, the mood of oil country, gentlemen, went from complete and utterly sour to almost elated in about 15 minutes, if I have the timing right. Because in those 15 minutes, we went from all kind of bitching about Athanasiou and Benning, and a lot of people weren't necessarily happy. You know, they were kind of like, everyone wanted Seth Jarvis so much. And no, this is no knock on Dylan Holloway. It speaks probably more to our hockey knowledge than anything else, that we all had our hearts set on a player hardly any of us had ever seen play, over another player that we'd never seen play. But people had their hearts set on Seth Jarvis, and we got Dylan Holloway, who may turn out to be the better player. But for all of those reasons, things were just, and you know, there was a tweet that came out that the Oilers, you know, it was confirmed about not matching Athanasiou's, not making the qualifying offer to Athanasiou and Benning. And then there was like three spurts of news. There was the Carter Savoie draft. There was Jesse Puljujarvi's return on a fantastic contract, like, you know, frankly. And then there was the drafting of Tyler Tololi. What is his name, Kurt?
Tullio.
Mr. T, Mr. Double T was drafted. And people, all of a sudden, Bruce, I couldn't imagine, like, the explosion, the amount of agreement when Puljujarvi signed. For once, oil country was united in applause for the moment. If nothing else, a moment. Maybe, you know, the GM, the player, lots of kudos for both of them. But everybody seemed happy for a second. Maybe even Mark Spector. Mark gets a little bit of heat because he's criticized Puljujarvi in the past, but everyone seemed happy. Bruce,
I had to laugh with the outpouring over Tullio. Like, only in Edmonton would everybody be thrilled with a 5th round draft choice.
Well, they were thrilled on Skype, all those young players, man. They like, that was amazing.
Yeah.
To see, like, people taken in the 5th round. Like, who knew how excited people in the 6th round would be when they get drafted? Wow.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
It was.
My thought is that the morning was so long, right? I mean, there was what happened last night. And last night, I mean, the three of us were talking about the State of the Union, you know, with Kleppbaum and McDavid and all, you know, all the lost draft choices and all the things that have happened. And then the entire time that it took that second round to be called, which was like 2.5 hours through the second round, knowing that we never had a second round pick because we spent it on 9 games of a player. And it just, I mean, it was just a sour taste in my mouth following all of that. I mean, it was, well, the draft started at 9:30 and the Oilers made their first pick at something like 1 o'clock.
I was going to say, because we just got into the 3rd round. It looked like something was finally going to happen, and then Ken trades down. Right?
Well, the trade down was the thing that turned the day around, because I personally have been, and you've heard me, David, many times in this podcast, anybody who listens to me, mourning the loss of draft choices, the ones for Chiarelli and McClellan, the one for Neal, these ones that are traded away for not very much. Well, today, basically, Ken Holland created a draft choice out of nothing. He had a 76 draft choice. He traded away for 2 picks, and we got 2 guys that either of them I would have been happy to take at number 76 and called a good pick. And they got 2 guys with that one number 76 pick. And what do you know?
Here's the thing about this. Maybe you can help. I don't know. Like, I don't know if either of you are math geniuses. I'm a little skeptical than any of us are. But here's what I want to figure out. So there's all these people who do these, worked out the value of draft picks. So like if the first overall pick in the draft is worth 100 career NHL points, and the 10th pick in the draft is worth 20 NHL career value points, and the 75th pick is worth 2 NHL career value points, and then the 100th pick is worth 1.5, and the 125th pick is worth 0.9. Let's say. So when the Oilers made that trade, when you worked out the career value of the two picks, it was about the same. The 75th pick had the same career value when you added them up. But here's what I don't know about those numbers, and in terms of analysis, when you divide that career value for a lower round pick, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever it is, when you divide that from one player into 2 or 3 players, how does that change the equation? Because it just intuitively, I'm thinking, okay, you have 2 players who are like, all of those players are very low bets to make it, and the career value comes from an averaging of the 75th over the overall pick or the 100th overall pick. What you're really saying is to get a decent NHL player, there's a slightly better chance at 75th than at 100. But if you break it into 2 and you have just slightly less odds, is that a better bet?
Oh yeah.
Than going. So I think it is too, Bruce. So the career value doesn't quite capture it, does it? Then if you're just looking at, if you can break it into 3, or when the
5, like McT did.
Yeah. Isn't that a really good strategy? Or am I getting something wrong here? And how does career value express it incorrectly then, like as a way to analyze it?
Well, the only way you can get 2 good players is to make the trade and then make 2 good picks. Because if you keep the pick and make a good pick, you've only got 1 player, right? So so right away the math is skewed because you have different possible outcomes on the 2 different sides. But I mean, if you traded, first overall for number 80 and number 81, I'm guessing first overall is probably going to have a better value. But if you're talking about way down there in the nether regions of the draft, you still got to have the scouts to pull off the picks. And I think the last time I personally saw the Oilers pick a 4th and a 5th rounder in fairly close succession, where I went, I like that pick. I really like that pick. Was when they picked Caleb Jones and Ethan Bear back to back in 2015. And I mean, I wouldn't said, well, maybe one of the 2 will make it in the NHL. If you told me 5 years from now they're both going to be NHL players, I would have been elated. Well, maybe in 5 years from now these 2 guys will be, or maybe one of them will be. I just think they got a better chance of delivering, because I think that you look at the picks where they got these guys, and then you look at the rankings, and they're all the rankings rank both guys way higher than where Edmonton picked them. So unless all the rankings are wrong and the scouts are wrong, or something happens, you pick a guy when he's 18 and the time he's 23, he might have been hurt 1 or 2 times, or who knows what all happens between here and there. But these are guys with a chance, it seems like to me.
Well, and Bruce, if you circle back to your original point, if you're down a pint to begin with, bringing another pick back in is never a bad thing, right? It's a winning strategy from the point from which Holland started, which I think was your original point. I think that's probably the key point.
Yeah. I mean, you can only have so many players coming into your system at one point too, because you only have so many NHL contracts, so many good jobs at the AHL level too. So you don't want to just take all your second and third picks and turn them into fourth and 5th round picks. But
although they cleared lots of guys out today,
this work today, none of them I didn't think will be missed, except for aside from Athanasiou and Benning. So let's talk about the picks that they made. So Carter Savoie was really rated highly he's an AJHL player with the Sherwood Park Crusaders, top scorer there. He's Scott Wheeler of The Athletic was particularly enthused with this player, had him rated I think 32nd overall, and just was in love with this guy's shot, essentially saying this guy's shot is maybe the second best shot in this draft. Like his ability to get off a shot, he can score from bad angles, he can score from outside. He was comparing him to Alexander Holtz. Brian Lawton was also absolutely raving about Carter Savoie's shot. So, it wasn't in my mind. Jim Matheson of the Journal actually had tipped off everyone. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Matty was just guessing, but it was a pretty good guess that the Oilers might be taking Carter Savoie. But it looks to me like he's going to the University of Denver, I believe, a good hockey school, just a high skill player. we've been told for years that a good bet late in any draft is drafting smaller players with high skill, because that's where the payoff is going to come. They tend to be undervalued. So this just on a number of fronts, small, like draft history, hometown player, scorer, going to U.S. college hockey where he can develop. It just set off the pleasure centers in the brains of Oilers fans across the country. Everyone was super happy, I think, with that pick. What did you guys think?
I thought it also filled an organizational need that's been around for a long time. We've been missing an actual shooter in this organization for a long time, and if you take Leon Draisaitl, out of the equation, there's not a bunch of them on this team. Yeah, but you know what? It's a big step down from there in terms of shooter, right?
Yes.
And you could argue that Eberle was a pure goal scorer to some extent, but shooter, no. I mean, he had a quick, accurate shot, but not heavy at all. So this is something this organization hasn't had in a while, and I find that pretty intriguing.
Well, you mentioned Leon Draisaitl. I happen to think Leon's a pretty good passer too, so I like to have the idea of him passing the puck to someone else that can snipe the way he does.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, we've had a team of passers for a long time, right? And it's nice to see a few guys come into the organization that can shoot the pill.
We had some shooters that didn't work out, like Yakupov, obviously, is the biggest one. Like he was a shooter, and he just kept whiffing on the puck. He really did. He fell down a lot on his face when he was trying to shoot. And that's the best example. If Taylor Hall was something of a shooter as well, but he never really was able to get truly on track as a pure shooter like Draisaitl has, even in that top role. And then, that second line shooter, which you see on some teams, the guy who scores about 20 to 25 goals, because in that shooter role, we haven't had that guy for Jarrett Stoll maybe would be the last. There's an example of that kind of player who could really fire that puck. But yeah, good to have him.
Savoie, I mean, there's lots of knocks against him about, his defensive side. Stuff that can be taught, but it's going to have to be taught, and he's going to have to demonstrate that he's got the desire and the commitment to, be willing to learn and do that stuff, because, you can't be a one-trick pony and play in the NHL. But if you're coming in with a trick that's an elite quality, and that trick happens to be shooting the puck, then that's a real nice head start on a career. And I mean, we'll see. They're rolling the dice, but they're rolling the dice from the sounds of it on at least one elite skill. And he had huge numbers. I mean, 53 goals. He only played 54 games. It's 90% of a typical AJHL schedule. He scored the most goals in this league in 19 years. 53 goals.
I wonder what he would have got in the WHL if he had played on a WHL team this year. Like, would he have scored 30, 25, 30? I wonder what I can't say. I don't know what it is.
I mean, it's obviously guys that have draft age. Many of them are beyond the AJHL, except for the people going to college route, which he is. And of course, he's been playing in Sherwood Park, and now that I want to go out and scout the guy, he's moving to Denver. So,
all right, let's talk about Jesse Puljujarvi. And I think I've been bullish on this ever since he left. I thought there's a real good chance he's coming back. I thought right from the start, this is an excellent move by Puljujarvi. I know some people were down on it, but the fact is, if the Oilers had signed him last fall, it was a really bad fit because his confidence was low, and he was in a contract situation where he had to come in and help the Oilers immediately and make the team because they had run out of options with him. If they sent him down, they were gonna lose him on the waiver draft. So he was coming back from injury. He needed to rebuild his confidence. And I give Puljujarvi all kinds of credit in the world for being a young man who took his fate in his own hands and made a controversial move that was heavily criticized by some, going back to Finland. Yeah, going back to Finland and getting his game and his life and his head and his body together and doing that. I just thought, what a smart thing for you to do. And I also thought there's a silver lining. This could still work out for the Oilers because the Oilers, if he had signed with the Oilers, I think he wouldn't be with the Oilers right now. I don't think it was going to work out. He needed to have that full year to get back his game and get back his confidence. And then the second thing that really worked out was the change of leadership and Ken Holland coming in. And at what great work by Ken Holland on this. Right from the start, he sent out the right messages. We're open to having this player come back. Doesn't make any sense to trade him. I'm not trading. I'm not a dummy. And I think he conveyed that to Puljujarvi and his agent. And I think it finally kind of everything started to sink in with everyone that the best bet for this player and team was for him to come back. So I think that's now I might be wrong, but I think that narrative is now kind of maybe the dominant narrative, and that's why people are happy. They just see this really it's kind of a happy story. It's not a negative story about a player quitting on his team. It's a good story about a player coming, taking a chance, getting his head together, his life together, and then everyone coming back and trying to make it go. Agree or disagree, Kurt Leavins?
I agree to a point, because I still think that the player quit on his teammates.
Yeah.
But you know what? Maybe he had to sort his head out. Maybe he had to mature. And so maybe these steps allowed him to do that. I think a lot of people are, first of all, let me say, the best value Ken Holland was ever going to get out of this player was to re-sign him. Otherwise it was going to be cents on the dollar, right? So having done that, I think a lot of people are still getting ahead of themselves, and I see all kinds of people saying he should be up with McDavid. I think there's a 50-50 chance that he won't work out.
Yeah. Oh, maybe higher than that. Yeah.
Right. But the contract that Ken Holland brought him back on is designed so that's not a killer if it happens. I don't think anybody expected a 2-year deal. I didn't.
No.
Shocker. I did predict the low, the 1.1, 1.2 million. I didn't foresee the really smart part about it, especially this year, is that year one is just a $900,000 cap hit. Talk about lowering the risk on an investment. I think that's it. It's a fabulous contract.
Makes it much easier to trade too. If you think about it,
yes.
If it's not going to work out here, you can now move this player much easier than I think. Kurt, why do you say he quit on his team? So I just want to dig into that a little bit more, because I think because I think I'm going to say that's kind of I think it's old school. Like in the past, that's what, because players they quit on their team all the time now. Everyone's always, it's a different world right now, where people can do what they want, go where they want. And the business allows that. The business is made.
I don't buy that at all. The player and his agent said, "I'm taking my hockey sticks and I'm going home."
Okay.
And I'm here to tell you that to the person, every single person in that dressing room would have gone, "Fine, go." and if you think that's a recipe for building a strong dressing room, I think you're wrong.
Well, they were unanimous.
Yeah. However, I think all the guys in that room really want to win. And I think they know that the kid has talent. And they're going to be big enough and magnanimous enough to say, okay, this guy gets a second chance because he's coming back. He's choosing to come back. So I do think he has repaired it to this point. Don't get me wrong. But I'm not willing to give the guy a free pass for packing his hockey bag and going home. I'll never believe that was the right thing to do.
He didn't have a contract, though. It's not like he walked away the way Jonathan Drouin did from Tampa Bay when he was in the middle of a contract and he didn't like the way he was being utilized, so he walked out.
But he didn't have a contract because they made it clear he wasn't going to play in Edmonton. His agent said it. So it's, no, he didn't have a contract, but they were interested in one.
He lived up to his contract. And he had other options, and he had reason to be not too happy with things that had happened here, including the surgery thing and all that. I mean, I think the year off breathing period was good for both sides. And, it's happened before. I mean, under Ken Holland's watch, Yuri Hudler went back to Czech for a year, and then he came back the next year and carried on as a Red Wing. And, I mean, Mark Giordano, he went over to Russia and he came back and they made him captain of the team. I mean, some might say he bailed on his team when he went to Russia. I mean, I don't know if I see it that way. These days you have contracts and, you don't own the player, you own the contract. And, and the two sides have to agree on the next one.
You guys watch that Michael Jordan thing with Dennis Rodman and how Phil Jackson handled Dennis Rodman in the last championship season? Dennis Rodman did quit on the team. He went to Vegas in the middle of the year, took off, and the coach just was okay. Running a team is a complicated thing. This player needs this. He needs to blow off steam. Dennis is going to be Dennis. I'm going to say Yessa is going to be Yessa. He's maybe a little bit different player. Now, they're different players. Rodman had really proven himself as a champion by then. Right. But, I just think there are different ways of handling these things, different ways of finessing situations with personnel and with people. And I'm liking what I'm seeing with Holland and Tippett in this regard. And maybe they can do this because there wasn't the frustration that Todd McLellan and maybe Ken Hitchcock went through with this player, trying to work with him and being frustrated. But I still hold, and I want to hear what you guys will, before we move on. I want to hear one final issue. I still hold that the whole McDavid-Draisaitl dynamic, that Puljujarvi got caught up in the meat grinder of that politics, in a way, of team politics. Those two players were desperate, wanted to play together. And when they were playing together, when Jesse Puljujarvi was playing with either one of them, that meant they were not playing together, and they were not happy about that. They wanted to play together. I think that's clear by now. And that dynamic is now gone, I think, almost completely gone. They know they're going to be on their own separate lines. And I think this will help Puljujarvi finding a place with either one of them, actually, as their center, as may happen. So what do you think of that theory, gentlemen?
I don't mind it. I mean, I think there's certainly some legitimacy to it, and I think there's a case can be made that not only Puljujarvi's a year and a half older than last spring, but so are many of his teammates. And they're going to be more mature. I think they're going to be more focused on the goal, which is the team winning, getting the best team they possibly can on the ice. I mean, I'd make the case today. You could look at today and say the Oilers, in a sense, traded Andreas Anathiou for Jesse Puljujarvi and $1.8 million in cap space. And maybe they win that trade. I mean, what are you going to spend the money on? The $3 million you didn't spend on Athanasiou? Well, you just took 40% of it, and you brought in a 22-year-old right winger that still has a tantalizing amount of talent.
Kurt?
It'll depend on what headspace he comes back in. And I think if the two sides have met and agreed on a contract and agreed for him to come back, I'm making an assumption, it's probably a safe one, that his headspace is immeasurably better than it was when he left. And that'll be a good sign. I can tell you two of the reasons why things didn't work out when he was here is that teammates didn't want to play with him.
Yeah.
And it was partly because he was stubborn and he wasn't willing to fit into the system. Now, he's 18 years older now. And especially when you're that young, 18 months is a long time. And so I think there'd be a lot of room for him to think about things, adjust, grow. And from what I've heard from a couple of people who know him, he's actually a good kid at heart. And if he's had a chance to kind of reset, well, then it might work out. It really might. But I go back to having serious reservations about how he conducted himself when he was here. That still leads me to think that he's kind of skated out on everybody. But in the next breath, I'll say people can change. And if he's coming back in a new headspace and his teammates are looking at him as if he's coming back in a new headspace, I agree with you. It's got a chance at working. And I've always said this, as much as I've had some issues with the young guy, I hope it works out for him and the team. So my fingers are crossed and probably my toes too.
Well, I don't understand Finnish, but where you could see him getting his head back on the way it was, like the way it naturally is for him, I think, is the happy-go-lucky kind of kid that we saw. I saw that come back in Finland last year. I saw the smile. And really, the longer he was in Edmonton, the more he kind of tightened up on that kind of stuff, and not for the better. And I think he got rejuvenated in Finland, and let's hope that carries over to his return to North America.
And I'll add in this: it ain't easy playing for Ken Hitchcock, and I won't put that on Yessie, because I have an opinion about Ken Hitchcock in today's NHL, and it ain't a good one. So I'll give him a pass on that experience.
Yeah, Tippett seems to be able to look at a player, figure out what role that player should have on his team, put him in the role, and get him to perform in it. Now, I would have liked, it would have been nice to see Athanasiou actually with Tippett for a full year, honestly, because of that. And it's kind of disappointing the way this is all played out, because I think maybe Tippett could have figured out, unlock the key with this player. I think I really saw that happen with a lot of players under Dave Tippett this year, but not to be. And so let's move on to Tullio, the next pick. Kurt, what do we know about this young player?
It's a player who he's got good offensive tools. He's very good with his hands. Sees the offensive zone well. I understand is an above average skater, maybe not a great skater, but an above average skater. And you can see where the guy's going to need to end up and have a couple of years in the AHL, and then see if he can squeeze his way into a bottom six role in the NHL. Coming from fifth pick, that's always a tall order. We always know that. But he and the entire range of players that were taken today, I think it's the only time in Oilers history that they've taken all forwards in a draft, correct?
Yeah.
And we all know that an organizational weakness of this team was skill up front. And he fills that role. So I like the pick from those two aspects.
Bruce, any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, one is the kid's dad owns the team. That's a little different. And they drafted his own kid, 11th overall, I think, in the OHL draft. I read somewhere. But it's not like he came in and didn't work at it. Obviously, everything I've read about him, all the stats, everything, like he improved significantly year over year. This year, 62 games, 66 points as a 17-year-old. And here's elite prospects. Here's their brief scouting report. And this one, there's some nice dimension to this report. I quite liked it. When the shot isn't an option, Tullio shows a great deal of adaptability, integrating one-touch maneuvers, playing pucks into space, manipulating defenders out of shooting lanes. You name it, and he can do it. He plays with a high motor and shows real attention to detail on the defensive side. Now, what's not to like about that? Yeah. You know, he's got subtle offensive skills. I mean, it doesn't say he's got a wicked shot, but it sounds like he's a smart player with a, high motor. Gotta like the sound of that. And he's not that big. I mean, you're 5'11", 165. And I mean, you look at some of the high-end picks last night. Some of those guys aren't any bigger than that.
Yep. Well, it's a different NHL now, right? So there's more room for those guys now than there used to be. And you mentioned Smart, Bruce. That's the other thing. 3 or 4 different places where I went looking for more information on this young guy. Smart kept showing up in one version or another. Like it's clear that the guy thinks the game really well for a 17-year-old.
Mark Seidel said there was 2 players. I can't remember the other one off the top of my head, but Tullio was one of them. The teams are really going to regret not having taken earlier in the draft. And Mark Seidel is one of the smartest public draft experts out there. I mean, he puts a ton of experience, a lot of work into it, and so that was very, very high praise. So hopefully the Oilers did with the late round forward picks what they did with the late round defenseman picks in 2015 today. The next one on our list is, what was the next one? Bruce, the guy you wrote about. Maxine Barry.
Berryoskin, yeah. There's multiple spellings of both his first and last names, which will make things fun. He's actually a teammate of Daneshkin, Maxime Daneshkin, that Oilers picked last year. Same junior team, Loco Yaroslavl, and 10 months younger than Daneshkin, but he outscored him last year. He's a way bigger man. Like, he is big. He's listed as 6'4", 216 as a just turning 19-year-old. And that's not just on Elite Prospects, but it's also on his KHL page. And he's actually in the KHL now. He's played 7 games this year for Locomotive. And he's only playing 7 minutes a night, which is pretty typical for the young guys. They really spot them in. But the fact is, he's made it up into the bigs, and he's big enough. And after picking two smaller guys, you want to get a mix of guys. You want to get a right shot. He's a right shot. He's a winger. He likes to play left wing, but some scouts see him as better suited ultimately to be a right winger in the National League. But a winger, and a couple of videos I saw some real nice hands with the puck. And so I don't know. I mean, skating is the issue. I read one that said he was a strong skater. Another said that that's what he needs to work on, and both can be true when you're talking about 18-year-old kids.
The next player on our list is 169th pick overall, Philippe Engerasse, who plays for the University of New Hampshire. He's 21. He's Swedish. He's a right shot center, okay size. People following the cult of hockey have been reading a lot about a player called Apeli Rasanen in the last few years. And this player just seems like, okay, well, if Apeli Rasanen doesn't turn out, then we have the new Apeli Rasanen right here in Philippe Engerasse. Just, kind of a solid two-way center with some good skating, some ability, but from the Anton Lander school of Swedish forwards. and we'll see. Anton Lander was a much higher draft pick and has become a very good player in the KHL, and I think should still be the Oilers' fourth line center personally. But we'll see. I'll read what Carl Larson of Future Considerations said about him. Now, this was before Engerasse came to North America, had to sit out a year because he had played some pro hockey in Sweden and then played last year in New Hampshire. So this is an older report, but I'm sure it sums him up. He said, quote, "He is a clever two-way center who reads the game well, has really great skating abilities and good work ethic, has improved his release and is now a good shooter, combined with the smartness which he used to find unexpected passes." So there we go. Just we'll see. And kind of the good thing about this pick, he is an older player, but so that's not necessarily a good thing. But they got a couple of years here, at least 2 more years. 2 years in college to watch this player, and if after 2 years he turns out, you can sign him, and if he doesn't, well, that's kind of what you expect from a 6th round pick, that it's not going to work out. So,
but again, right shot center fills an organizational need, right?
Yeah.
Sure. You got hopefully one of those right shot centers somewhere is going to work out. I mean, it's funny, David, you mentioned Apeli Rasanen, and then you mentioned Anton Lander, and I immediately jumped Philippe Engerasse to Anton Lander, but bear in mind that for years I've been comparing Apeli Rasanen to Anton Lander. So sort of gritty. Like, I noticed all the C's, like he's been captain on Elite Prospect shows when they've been captain or assistant captain of their team, and I put some stock in that. I think that's I want guys fair. That have been in leadership positions. And, it's not a direct stat that you can measure, but usually you see those guys that have a string of those, and they tend to be high character players, which Anton Lander was and is, as we know. And he was captain of Sweden's team at the World Junior, for example. But this guy, I mean, because of the NC2A and their crazy regulations about professionals, he had to sit out an entire year because he played 6 games in the Swedish Hockey League as a call-up.
What a bunch of jerks.
Yeah, I know. It's like, well, we have to keep our athletes pure and pristine, and in the meantime, the universities are just rolling in the money, right?
It's all a big scam. Yeah, it's a big scam.
Yeah, don't get me started. But anyway, he kind of got the short end of that, and he bounced back with a pretty half decent. I mean, as a 20-year-old freshman, that's a little older, 15 points in 25 games, and found a role, which is always tricky for the freshman. We'll see how he does. I mean, to me, this pick was like totally off the board, and I couldn't find anything on the guy for about 10 minutes before found a couple of older references to him. And because nobody had him in their draft guide because he was in his third year of eligibility. So,
Kurt, let's move on to the next player. And Jeremias Lindeval.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about him?
Lindeval. This is a 7th round pick that I think could have been a 6. This is honestly, this is kind of he's kind of an intriguing player, right? He's got good size. I think he's 6'1". And if you follow a couple of different postings, his weight's gradually been going up. Like he's been growing into his frame. When you read about how he uses that frame, apparently very effectively around the net, he's able to box defenders out. He's good at protecting the puck and has good hands around the crease. So it feels like he's that kind of player. You know, maybe James Nealish in some ways. Interesting about his skating, he's described as an average skater, but with good acceleration. To me, you don't have to be a burner, but if you can get going fairly quick, you win puck battles. And so I thought that was a very interesting comment, and I saw that in a couple of places. So I like this kid, and I think for a 7th round pick, when the odds are super low that he'll even be an AHL player, let alone an NHL player, it seems like there's some promise in this guy. And I meant to preface it before we started talking about all these players. I think I've only seen one of these guys play even a single game. So what do I know? But when you do the research and you dig into what you can find, it's amazing with Lindeval. It's like he's got some things going for him, and it'll be kind of fun to watch him develop over the next couple of years and see what he turns into.
You know, go ahead, Bruce.
Which guy have you seen play, Kurt?
Savoie.
Right.
I've never seen any of them play.
I've seen Dylan Holloway play for Team Canada at the Hlinka Gretzky tournament in 2018. And he was one of the underagers on that team. Of course, Alexis Lafreniere was the one that was getting all the attention, and with reason. But he made the team, and he didn't look out of place. Like, I can't say that I followed him around the ice like I would have if I knew the Oilers were going to draft him in 2 years. But he didn't stand out in any kind of a bad way. Let's put it that way. He scored some points, and he won a gold medal. So.
Yeah, I saw Carter Savoie one winter night at the Grant Fuhr Arena in Spruce Grove.
Nice. You seen his little brother play?
He's supposed to be pretty darn good, Matt.
He went first overall in the WHL draft. Now, Matthew Savoie, I have seen him play in the John Reed Bantam tournament here in St. Albert that they have every February, I think it is. And it's they bring in teams from all over the place. Well, I went to the gold medal game, and Matthew Savoie was one of the, I think, youngest players on the ice. He was a year underage, and all he did was score the tying and winning goals in the third period of the gold medal game.
That's it, eh?
That's all. I didn't even know he was, and I thought, who's this number 7? Man, he's good. And then later I sort of connected a name to the guy, and then started to read some of the stuff, and I went, wow, maybe I saw the beginning of something. So
it was interesting to listen to the draft as I did most of it today. There was just rave reviews about every player, and you start, they're like in big time comparisons, and and then you think, well, they can't all be this good, but what it made me realize is, they are all really good. Like, all of these players are fantastic hockey players. They are utterly fantastic hockey players. But then the second realization is, so we can hold that, and we don't have to discredit that. We don't have to throw out the window just how fantastic these players are. But the pyramid gets so steep, like, to make it, because all of these players drafted are so freaking good. They are so amazing. It's just so hard to get ahead. It's almost impossible, because you are going up against such incredible talent to make it to the NHL. So you have Carter Savoie, who's just an amazing hockey player. Like, if you ever played with someone like that or watched him play, if you just think, what a guy. But the pyramid is so steep. It is so steep. And that's why even these incredible young players, only a handful of them will turn out to be NHLers.
Yeah, a third of them will play in the league, some, and and a fraction of that will be, make a long career out of it. So I'm willing to bet, David, though, the 217 picks in this year's draft, the 216 of those guys could dangle around you in your beer league games. And the 217th was the pick that got taken away from Arizona.
You know, I was blessed when I lived and worked in Toronto, and in addition to covering the Leafs, covered the Blue Jays, and I was absolutely blessed to sit beside the legendary Milt Donnell in the press box at Skydome, and Milt, every so often when you'd see a young kid come up and make a great play, Milt had these black rimmed glasses, and he'd look at you and you'd look over top of his black rimmed glasses and say, "Never forget, kid. They're all good." And he's right. And that's the thing. It's just gradients of good when they get to that level, right? And it's the special ones that kind of float to the top. So Milt what an amazing guy he was. That's another story for another day. So.
I was a summer student at the Toronto Star in sports back in 1980.
Is that right, David?
Milt Donnell was there, and he had a gold phone.
Did he?
Someone had given him a gold phone. He must have been in his 80s then. He was very, very.
He was in his late 80s when I was working beside him. Yeah, he was the dean of the press gallery. What a guy.
All right, let's talk about what's next for the Oilers. Okay, let's dig into that. So there's a number of RFAs that did not get qualified today, and I'm just wondering, on that list of RFAs who didn't get qualified, including Andreas Athanasiou and Matt Benning, either of them could easily end up back with the Oilers. We shouldn't discount that as a possibility once they see what the market holds for them. Bruce, what do you see? Do you have the list in front of you? What are the names that you find intriguing?
I do. I was expecting this list to be actually a little richer than it turns out to be. I thought there'd be more of these guys, and I didn't, to be perfectly frank, didn't go through all the list of every team's expiring contracts with that in mind. But I mean, there were some tough decisions made, but I don't think there was a single case of a RFA signing for less than his qualifying offer. And today, for instance, Dylan DeMello, a very good player in Winnipeg that I hoped would hit the market, he signed a 4-year extension with the Jets. But names that jump off the list, Vinny Hinostroza of Arizona, who wasn't tendered a $1.5 million qualifying offer, probably because they were worried about compensation. He's a pretty good player, but I wouldn't want to get in an arbitration battle with him. But when you're dealing with these guys this year, it's the teams that hold the upper hand, and you might be able to get a guy on a fairly cheap hit. So Calgary lets go of Mark Jankowski, which is a player that's never really impressed me, but he's a well-known name. He was going to be the best player in his draft year. Wasn't that about 8 years ago?
Yeah.
Columbus, Devon Shore is a decent player. Brendan Perlini is a guy that they had high hopes for at one time. The longest list, I think, is Edmonton. Andreas Athanasiou, Matt Benning, Ryan Kuffner, Ryan Mantha, Angus Redmond, Nolan Vesey, Cameron Hebig, Logan Day. And unfortunately, most of that list is just clearing out of guys that didn't pan out, or in the case of the unfortunate Ryan Mantha, suffered a career-ending affliction to his eye. Lucas Wallmark in Florida. That's kind of an interesting player to me. I remember him in Carolina as being just a nice bottom sixer that got the job done.
You haven't mentioned Anthony Duclair yet.
Anthony Duclair. I'm just getting down to Ottawa, and he's next. Right. Anthony Duclair in Ottawa. And his qualifying offer, I think, was just $1.25 million. But again, they didn't go there. They got lots of young players coming up in the Ottawa system, and for whatever reason. One guy I like, Dominic Simon in Pittsburgh. He's got really good underlying numbers, and under the radar player, not a big scorer, but I think, an NHL caliber player. Then again, maybe he's Joakim Nygaard the 7th. There are these guys around, but you want to have some of them on your team. Freddie Gauthier in Toronto, and I've heard Leaf fans with mixed opinions on that guy, but if you're looking for a depth center that has got some defensive side of his game, And also Evan Rodriguez, the guy that came to Toronto in the big trade with Pittsburgh. They didn't qualify him at 2 million. They tried to sign him for less, I understand. Talking to my brother, who's a big Leafs fan, but he thinks they might circle back to him at a lower figure.
Bruce, did you mention Dominic Cahoon? Did you mention him?
Dominic Cahoon. I either missed him or I haven't got to him yet. He's also on the list. Dominic Cahoon. Yeah.
Cahoon, he got 2.2 points per 60, which is a very, very good rate of scoring.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I get these Dominics mixed up, except for the one in Chicago. I know who he is. And Troy Stetcher in Vancouver. I was really surprised.
That's caught me by surprise too. I agree.
He's a good player. Like, I always see that guy good.
They spent too much money on fourth liners in Vancouver.
Well, he's their Matt Benning, I guess. Like he's a good third pairing right shot defenseman.
You know what? I saw him play twice in Vancouver this year, and that's exactly what he is. He's an entirely serviceable NHL 5-6.
Mm-hmm. And
he can move the puck. He can pass that puck too.
Yep.
So those were the names. Nick Cousins as well in Vegas, that played for Vegas in the playoffs. But just he's just a role player. He's not somebody who's going to come in and play with McDavid or anything. And I'm not sure there's anybody on this list that you could say that about. But they've got
the only guy with that kind of even close to that kind of a pedigree would be Duclair, right? I mean, there's a kid who can really skate. On the face of it, had a good offensive year, although I think 3/4 of his output was in the first half of the season, right? And he really tailed off in the second half.
Let me just
one more here. Carter Verhagey from the Stanley Cup champion and Tampa Bay Lightning, who played in the closeout games of the Stanley Cup finals when they had a couple guys hurt. And to my eye, a good young player, and just Tampa is in so much cap hell that whatever margin he makes over minimum was something they thought they could replace with less. So, but he might be a decent player to check out.
Let's do this. There's talk of lots of free agents, Markstrom, Barry, not so much a Taylor Hall anymore. There's talk Chris Russell. What do you think would be, just generally speaking, like what are the 2 or 3 things you think the Oilers are going to do here in the next couple of days? And we'll just go around the circle. So just think of 2 or 3 things that you think the Oilers are going to do. And do you want? I can start, or do one of you want to start? Why don't I start? Chris Russell, I think there's a much greater chance that he sticks around with Klefbom's shoulder problems, and Chris Russell's value to the team. He can play in the top 4 if you need to play him in the top 4. That's not ideal, obviously, at this point. You need a better puck mover, I think, than Chris Russell in the top 4. But on the left side, in the top 4, or on the left side in the bottom pairing, he's not a bad player. He's a good hockey player. He's a very good defensive hockey player. If you could move him, that opens up $4 million in cap space. So you could get maybe you could get a player like that for $2 million. So that's got to be on their minds. If they can move him, maybe they're thinking that, but maybe they're thinking, he's part of this team. We know what we have. We're just gonna go with it, because then you have Russell, Klefbom, Jones, and Nurse on your left side, and you're set. You're good for next year, whatever comes what may, and move along, not think about anything else. So I'm leaning. I had been saying the alpha move this summer was to move out Chris Russell. That was before this knowledge about Klefbom came out. So I'm going to back away from that and say, I see that's much more up in the air. As for the free agents, these big names tossed around, like I'm thinking Markstrom's a long shot. I don't see the money working. I could be wrong about this, but I'm not necessarily sold that Markstrom's that much better a goalie than some of the other less costly options, with so many options out there. Spending 5-6 years on Markstrom at $6 million a year doesn't really appeal to me, honestly. And I just wonder if that's the right thing to do for the Oilers. I wonder if the Oilers can outbid other teams for this player as well. So I'm not big on that move, because I think there's going to be cheaper options in net. And Why don't I just leave it there? Those are, well, the last thing I want to talk about was Barry, Larson. So I don't think there's necessarily room for both of those defensemen on the team, Tyson Berry and Adam Larson. So the Oilers would have to kind of decide to go in a different direction if they go with Tyson Berry. I think maybe you could have both. Maybe you could fit that under your cap. If Berry's the one big guy you bring in this year, the one big signing, I like the idea of Tyson Berry coming in. I think he's a hell of a hockey player. But I wonder, could you sign Barry and then move out Larson and get something in return? I think you could. I think I think Larson's movable at his contract, so I think that might be a possibility. Sign Barry and then you move out Larson, or maybe they keep both. But if there is a big free agent signing, that would be my guess. Would be Tyson Berry. Kurt, why don't you go next?
I think goaltender's on the top of their list.
Okay.
I don't have any inside information at all on Markstrom. But the one thought that I did have was, if they could afford him, the only way they could afford him is if they were going to move Koskinen. Can they find a landing place for that contract? And before Ottawa made their trade earlier today, I thought, maybe the Senators would take a guy like that. I can see Koskinen playing 50 games in Ottawa. Well, that's not going to happen now. But I think that's the other chip that would have to fall for that kind of a free agent signing and goal. But I think goaltending is on top. So there's that. On defense, I'll actually just pick up quickly on two things. I was told by two well-placed people today, that there's a very good chance Chris Russell stays this year for the reasons that you just gave. With Tyson Berry, and I've tweeted this out before, but I haven't said it. Tyson Berry would absolutely make the Edmonton Oilers a better team, but he is not a first-pairing defenseman. He is not a strong defender. He's a very good puck mover and an excellent power play guy. But if you ask me, if he's on your team, Adam Larson is your first pairing right shot defenseman. And if Barry is your 2, then Ethan Bear is your 3. And so I have trouble seeing how that's going to work over on that side. So I'm sold on what Barry brings, what he brings, but he's not going to play against the other team's best players.
Not if you can help it.
Yeah. And the last thing is, and I found it very interesting today with the buyout of Turris. Mm-hmm. There's a guy that has a really solid resume. He's no longer what he used to be. But if you put him on this Oilers team as a right-handed shot, third line center, I think you could do one hell of a lot worse. I think he's the kind of guy they're looking for, but I highly doubt if the Oilers are interested. They're probably not the only people that will be in the bidding for him, because a lot of people will covet right shot centerman of his quality as much as the Oilers would. So those are kind of my 3 thoughts overall.
Bruce.
Yeah, well, Turris was badly overpaid in Nashville. I mean, they made 2 mistakes. They traded for him in that big 3-way deal with Colorado and Ottawa, where they moved on the Samuel Girard and a second-round pick and another NHL player, Vladislav, I've forgotten his last name, that's playing part-time at least in Colorado. But Girard was the big loss there. No, Girard was the big loss in that trade. And then they gave him a 6-year times $6 million contract. And he was one of the murderer's row of big contracts they had down the middle in Nashville with Ryan Johansson, now Matt Duchene, Kyle Turris, and Nick Bonino, who they also moved out today. So they cleared out the bottom 6. I don't see Turris as I see him as more of a skill player. I don't really see him as your at least your typical 3C as they're described. Like, he was sheltered by his coach in terms of the caliber of competition he played against. he started way more in the offensive zone than the defensive zone. He was well below 50% on faceoffs and lower than that in the defensive zone. And those are all the reasons you want your right-handed stick third center to look after those kind of situations. And maybe it's just he had a really bad year, but he did have a bad year. He was the worst minus player on Nashville in the regular season and the playoffs, and that was basically earned at even strength.
If I could pick up on that, I think the value of having a guy like that would be, because everybody has been talking about Jesse Puljujarvi, maybe playing in the first top two lines. Well, I think it's highly unlikely that he starts in either of those spots, but starting as a third line right wing with Kyle Turris in the center, I can think of a worse pairing than that. And then your Riley Sheahan $1 million centerman is your 4C, which is what you describe, Bruce, as the guy that gets those tougher assignments. It's him and Draisaitl that take the D-zone draws and stuff like that. I guess I'm just seeing Turris as a possibility in a different role in the third line that actually would have some juice, as opposed to being more of a defensive alignment.
In the Ryan Strome role, eh?
Yeah, with maybe Tyler Ennis on the left-hand side.
Give him more than a week to get going.
Yeah, if you think Turris, Ennis, Puljujarvi as a third line,
there should be some goals in that trio,
right? Yeah, so it's all of a sudden you've got 3 pretty usable lines. I guess that's the other thing, right? Is there's a logjam on right wing now, so something's got to give there.
Yeah, and on left wing they have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Nygaard, Benson, and James Neal, essentially, unless I'm missing someone. So Tyler Ennis might be added to that group, or a better player than Tyler Ennis. But Tyler Ennis was a pretty good player. His points per 60 was pretty darn good the last 2 years. If he can stay healthy, Tyler Ennis can play hockey.
I thought he did everything they asked him to when he came over in the spring.
Yeah. So we'll end with this one thing. I'm going to put you both on the spot. On the current roster, the most likely Oiler to be traded is, and I'm going to go with J.J. Kara. I think that if they bring in a third-line center, Haas is completely capable of playing fourth-line center. And there's lots of teams that seem to be wanting to get bigger and tougher. So I'm going to go, as much as you'd think maybe it's going to be one of these right wingers, I'll still go with J.J. Kara as my most likely Edmonton Oilers to be traded in the next week.
I'll say Alex Chiasson, not because I want to see him go. I think he's a very useful player on this club. But with the logjam that is what it is on right wing, and his salary would be, a significant amount of money going out, which wouldn't hurt the situation either. I think those two things probably lean in my direction. So officially it would be not a guy I'd want to see go, but I think probably a guy that we might see go.
Bruce?
Yeah, I wouldn't like that. I like Chiasson.
I like him too.
It's fan club. I think he's great. I really like his work on the power play. Very underrated. And a nice slow event player at even strength. And I think he's just a kind of a quiet leader at this team. And the one guy that's won the Stanley Cup. It's nice to have one of them in the room.
Look, I'm with you, but he's not going to play ahead of Yamamoto. I think Kassian brings a dimension that nobody else in the team brings.
Yeah.
And if we all agree the right place for Jesse to start is 3, well, then all of a sudden you're paying Alex Chiasson that much money to be a fourth line right wing.
And
you're right. It's like if you're going to give Puljujarvi a shake here, like a real. It's almost like you gotta move Chiasson, like
Archibald. Yeah, well, I'm gonna just rattle the cage, and I'm gonna name Zach Kassian as the guy. The guys looking for big, heavy hockey players, and the Oilers looking for cap space, and maybe there's a fit. I have a feeling that Kassian's probably not in the good graces of everybody in the Oilers' upper, brain trust after his no-show in the playoffs. That was after just signing the contract. That was a real disappointment. That's one exit interview. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall for that. After
or a fly on his head.
Oh for the playoffs with -4, And McDavid had more hits in each of 2 different games than Kassian had in the entire series. McDavid. I mean, that's the thing that, when your game's not going for you, Kurt, you'll attest to this, when the puck's not going in for you and you're a physical player, what are you going to do?
Yeah, what else are you doing for
something.
me, right? Yeah.
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 Well, it didn't
that's
happen.
Fair.
So.
In the meantime, there's also Russell, who's your 5th guy on right wing, who is far from an offensive dynamo.
Josh Archibald is your 5th guy.
Yeah,
Russell's your 6th guy.
and Russell's a guy who never made a mistake, right? Like, talk about a solid 4th line player. So, yeah.
I don't think there's much of a trade market for Patrick Russell.
No, I'm not suggesting that. It's just, but there's a budget guy you could put at 4 right wing, right, and save a pile of money. So,
Yeah. Well, it's going to be. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Maybe they are going to go splurge on the goalie. Maybe we'll see that. Hey, I'm not against having really solid goaltending. That's a big priority, and I actually am a big Koskinen fan. I wouldn't like to see him go. I think he's a very good NHL goalie, and I'd like to see him supplemented by another very good one, and just roll those guys out next year. So, well, let's leave it there. We're going to have the UFA day on this Friday. So maybe we'll be getting back together then.
Yeah, one tiny correction. I did look up Carter Verhagey, and he was at NHL minimum. So that wasn't for any kind of marginal cap reason. They just dumped him. And he was the AHL scoring champion the year before last, but I guess he just didn't have enough dimension to his game to make it full-time in Tampa.
Wow.
And a final note on Anthony Duclair, he's representing himself, which is a pretty novel approach.
Good luck.
It's been done before, but rarely successfully.
Kevin Lowe. Kevin Lowe famously represented himself, as I recall, against one of the toughest negotiators there ever was, Glenn Sather. All right. Thanks for talking, guys.
No, thanks for listening, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.